high mountain Asia and represent that region in this platform. So talking more about this presentation, I wanted to make this presentation more about my own personal academic journey, how I started my academic career in Cryosphere science, what motivates me and what makes me keep going in Cryosphere science basically. So I would like to start with a brief introduction of high mountain Asia. As we all know, high mountain Asia has the largest ice coverage outside of the polar regions. And although we don't have enough field information, the long-term records have shown that there is accelerated increase in glacier mass throughout this region. And there is one more thing that we need to understand. About high mountain Asia is that most of the countries in high mountain Asia are financially and politically struggling, right? So when you have all these accelerated mass change and when you have all these changes, these countries are already struggling and they have limited capacities to adapt and mitigate with all these changes. So talking more about glacier changes, so we can look at this figure and we can see that most of the glaciated river basins in high mountain Asia, they have some drastic decrease in projected glacier area change by 2050. And there is something we need to remember that in the short term, there will be increased discharge in the river basin because of the rapid glacier melt. But as we move towards the long-term period, there will be decreased river flow. And that's gonna affect communities because, so in the short term when there is increased discharge in the river, so communities will be facing extreme water events like many flooding events, right? And in the long term there will be water shortage in terms of hydropower and drinking water supply and other water related things. So all these struggling countries need to adapt very quickly with all these changes, and that's a struggle in high mountain Asia. And in this figure, we can see that high mountain Asia is already a disaster-prone region. And and I'm not trying to imply that all these flooding events come from glacier changes, which is not true because we also have extreme monsoon events and westerlies. So those events also create these flooding events. So what I want to highlight is when you look at the high mountain Asia region, Nepal, Bangladesh, and especially Islamabad area, there were thousands of people affected because of these flooding events, right? And when we look closely to the flooding events that happened in Pakistan recently, so here is a comparative figure from August 2010 and August 2020. So we can see that there is increased flooding extent in Pakistan within such a short period of time, and those communities need to adapt with all the changes, which is a huge struggle, right? So another cryospheric hazard that is a concern for high mountain Asia is glacial lake outburst flood. So whenever there is a glacier change, so there is an expansion in existing glacial lakes as well as an increase in number of glacial lakes in the region. So, and because of that, we have so many glacial lake outburst flood events. And as you can see, this is a very old figure, not very recent, but we can see that there is increased number of flood events in this region. Right? And here is one of the current research from Korean et al. And Dr. Pavilion was also a part of this very interesting research who is here in the audience. And we can see from this figure that there is an increased number of future glacial lakes in this region. So when you see I don't know how this pointer works, but when you look at the Pakistan region, you can see that there are so many future glacial lakes. And this is already a disaster-prone region when it comes to glove. And even this year, there are so many glove events in Pakistan, right? And this will be another huge challenge for those communities to adapt. So with this brief information on high mountain Asia, I want to circle back to my own research interest that I briefly mentioned earlier. So my research domain is glacier modeling and remote sensing. So I am mainly passionate about the cryosphere processes and how those model outputs drive our projections and everything. But as a cryosphere researcher coming from Nepal and high mountain region and high mountain Asia, I'm also very passionate about the social and policy implications of my own research, my projections, right? Our projections. And yeah, so there is one thing I have always been interested to explore is understanding the uncertainties coming from our projections. So in the next few slides, I will be discussing my previous research work, and I will highlight in detail how all those research projects had so much uncertainties. But yeah, so when we try to reduce our uncertainties in the model projections, what we can do is we can drive more effective policies in the region. And that is one of my research interests as a glacier modeler. So yeah, moving forward, I would like to very briefly discuss one of the previous research work that was recently published in the Journal of Glaciology, and how this research motivated me to move forward with my own PhD research that I have been doing right now. Okay, so in this research, what we did was we experimented with a coupled modeling technique. So as you can see in this figure, so first we have open global glacier model developed by Dr. Pavilion. And yeah, so this is a very state-of-the-art Glacier Evolution model, and we used this model to project future glacier area and future glacier volume. And we provided that information to Glacier Hydrological Data model, which is developed in Nepal by Dr. Mira Khadka. And okay, so in the second model, when you look at that model, you can see that there are so many calibration parameters. So I want to highlight a few. So there is degraded factor, which is snow, clean ice, debris covered ice. There is temperature lapse rate, there is precipitation gradient. We also had runoff coefficient for our base flow. So there is uncertainties coming from all these models. And what you have to remember that this region is already lacking field information, right? So we don't have enough field information on degraded factor, temperature lapse rate, precipitation factor. So because of that lack in data, because of that lack in field information, there is so much uncertainties in our model projections. And that is one of my research interests that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, so moving forward, here is just a quick visual representation of what goes within OGGM processes, from pre-processing to flow line module estimation, mass balance estimation, and I want you to focus on the last figure where we have glacier area and glacier volume projections for Khumbu Glacier, which is one of the very important glaciers in Kosi River Basin in Nepal. Yeah, and so when we have the glacier area and glacier volume for a single glacier, we compile that for the entire basin, and this research was carried out for all river basins in Kosi River Basin, sub basins in Kosi River Basin, right? So yeah. Okay, so this is weird because I had text over there and now it's all symbols. But okay, anyway, so this is another slide showing results from our Glacier Evolution model. And here we can see the drastic decrease in glacier area and volume in all of the 6 river basins. And so there was, in the text that is not shown right now, there was this percentage, like 65 to 75% change in glacier area and volume by through our RCP 4.5 and 8.5 scenarios. But I think it's very clear from the figures that there is a very drastic decrease. And especially on the right side, when you focus on the Likhu River Basin, which is a very small river basin within Kosi River Basin, and the river basin is around 800 square kilometer, right? It's a very small river basin, and in that river basin, you can see that by the end of the century, the entire glacier area will be gone. So the glaciers will completely disappear, and there are so many hydropower projects in that river basin dependent on the glacier now. So that is issue. So I want to quickly go through, so as I mentioned earlier, there were 2 models, right? So I showed the results from the Glacier Evolution model, and this one is from the Glacier Hydrological model, and the major conclusion from the Glacier Hydrological projection was that the wet seasons are getting wetter and dry seasons are getting drier in this region, and we can also clearly see the change in the peak month, right? So this monsoon, I was in Nepal, so it was not working this whole time. It was working, right? Okay. So I was in Nepal during this monsoon season, and monsoon is usually from June to September. But this year, it was until the end of October. And as a researcher working within glaciology and hydrology domain, I already struggle understanding all the extreme events because they are changing so quickly, right? And then, so I keep trying to figure out different ways. How can I communicate this information with stakeholders and policymakers? How can we make them understand the science behind the glacier modeling and all these projections? And before we provide them all the information from our projections, it is very crucial that we reduce our uncertainties within the model. Okay, so at the end of that research, we carried out a model sensitivity. And I think it's very understandable that the model was very sensitive to the temperature lapse rate because the model was using a temperature-dependent melt module. So those are few of the things how our results are influenced by the calibration parameters, by the model physical processes, right? So yeah, and so this research experience was very helpful to me to understand the direction that I wanted to go in my PhD, right? So yeah, and so some of the research limitations were we did not include the debris factor in this research, and like I mentioned, the research was clearly very over-parameterized, which is the main critical issue, and we did not carry out the uncertainty assessment. So yeah, so in my current PhD research, I'm working with Dr. David Rounds, who developed this amazing state-of-the-art model, Python Glacier Evolution model. And in this model, it has the Bayesian inference, which is used to quantify the uncertainties that come from model parameters as well as the climate data. Okay, so if we focus on this figure on the left, we can see that on the y-axis we have mass balance, and on the x-axis we have temperature bias, which is one of the calibration parameters of PISA, including degree factor for snow and precipitation factor. So there are 3 calibration parameters, and yeah, so it might sound like it's only 3 parameters, but as I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough information on these parameters, so our model is over-parameterized. So what we do is, okay, so one more thing, if we look at the figure, the gray area, it shows that whenever you have the lines going through that gray area, that is the optimum value that you can use for calibration. But even with just 3 calibration parameters, you can see that the model can have infinite combinations of all these calibration parameters. So that's an issue. And with Bayes' theorem, with Bayesian inference, what we are trying to do is we are trying to combine the prior information that we already have on calibration parameters, right? So, for example, if we have information about one of the calibration parameters, we have information on temperature bias. We combine our prior information with the observed data to estimate the posterior probability distribution, and the mean and variance of posterior distribution will give us the uncertainties of the calibration parameters as well as the optimum values that we can use for model projections or for calibration. Okay. So talking more about uncertainties, there is one more thing we have been trying to do. So as I mentioned earlier, along with glacier modeling, I'm also very passionate about remote sensing, and we have been using SAR dataset. This is one of the examples from Alaska that we have been doing. And so this figure is very colorful and pretty, but when you look closely, okay, so the first one is from April, right? So as we move from April towards June, so there is increased glacial melt on the glacier surface. So when there is melt, the backscatter, the SAR backscatter value gets observed, so there is less backscatter in summer months, and red is the high value of backscatter, and blue is obviously the less value of backscatter. And based on this variability of SAR backscatter and strength, what we are trying to do is we are trying to develop a product of glacier melt extent all over Alaska, and then we provide that information to have information on temperature bias. So if you remember from the earlier slide, temperature bias is one of our calibration parameters. So when you have prior information on, one of the calibration parameters, then we can use that to reduce our over-parameterization issues. So these are some of the things that we have been working on. I'm still getting started with my PhD, so I'm very excited where it goes. And yeah, definitely, so whenever we have reduced uncertainties in our model parameters, then I'm very excited that it will drive better policies, especially in high mountain Asia. And yeah, one more thing I wanted to share earlier, but I think I forgot. So Nepal submitted their second NDC in 2020, I think. In 2020, right? So when I was going through that report, I was like, okay, so we have very ambitious plans for our NDC, right? But what about the Cryosphere changes? Like, we need to reduce emissions and everything, but I think they failed to highlight the cryospheric issues in high mountain Asia, like how those emissions are going to drive the glacier mount. And I think those are the little things that I want to keep working on along with my PhD research to drive better policies in Nepal. So yeah, these are my references, and thank you. And I think we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
We're actually going to do a brief Q&A now with the three previous speakers, and our fourth early career scientist will go at a different time. Keep track of the schedule for that because it's a fantastic presentation. But we have for the 1 o'clock session some people in New Zealand as well as in the UK, and especially those in New Zealand want to get to bed, so we can't start too late. So if there are any questions, either for Mira, or for Chen, or for Sebastian, please.
Thank you.
I have a question for Chen as first. You said you're using adaptive meshes, so to have more information very close to the grounding line, and then when you do this very low simulation, is the model actually able to adapt to these changes of the grounding line's position and changes the mesh with time?
That's a very good question, thanks. Actually, for now, in our model, we just use a fixed mesh. So actually, when the ground line retreat in ground quickly, in the new area, the mesh evolution is pretty coarse. Actually, that's largely, reduce our confidence about our model results. But luckily, in the model, I use LMIs. Actually, in the future, we will apply a different mesh while it's going on with time, and then the mesh can adjust its resolution by according to the velocities. That's one way, and also the distance from the grounding line. So that's doable now, but yeah, that's our plan. Thanks for the question. Any other questions for three of us?
Hi, yes. There was a lot of technical data in those presentations, and I was just wondering about some of the more policy implications of what your data is trying to affect and what you would like to come out of it.
So this one is for Chen, right?
Me? Okay, I'll say first. So in my presentation, I show it very clear what our model shows us, like how sea level will rise based on the model to the end of 2,300 years. And the message is very clear and simple. It's going to lose ice very rapidly if we didn't commit 1.5 degree. And something is going to happen very quickly in the next decades if we don't do really real action on it. That's, yeah. We can't, like what I said in the last slide of my talk, and we can't not negotiate the melting point of the ice. That's the truth. That's very clear.
Yeah, so the message from my research would be, I think I mentioned that several times, because because I keep talking about uncertainties, but I think it would be that as a researcher, we need to keep working towards reducing uncertainties in our model projections, because that is where, yeah, because that will drive better policies, like I mentioned earlier, and I think that is something a clear message.
Hello. Yeah, in my case, I would just say that I focus on trying to give the best advice to, as an input to the legislations. Because the legislations often will derive on what's needed as an education approach and citizen information. So this is, for me, is key as a simplification of what it all represents. Because these all subjects sometimes are quite subjective. One way of solving this subjectivity is trying to approach it from the legislative perspective. So that would be my view.
Any other questions? Okay, so I think we are ready for the next presentation, and okay, so we'll go.
So, as I said, we will reschedule Ugo's presentation for a later period, and we really thank the three of you for presenting right now. There will be just about a 10-minute break, and then we will go into a discussion actually about sea ice around Antarctica. So thank you so much, and see you shortly.